up here know what they've got. High on the mountaintop, high on the mountaintop. The rest of the world like a little bitty spot. I ain't coming down, no never I'm not. High on the mountaintop, high on the mountaintop. I always loved Loretta. Since the first time I saw a coal miner's daughter. I love her still so much that I can forgive her affinity for the current occupant of the White House. And that, my friends, is a lot of love. One line from the film that stuck with me. If you're born in Kentucky, you got three choices. Coal mine, moonshine, or move it on down the line. Now, I wasn't born in Kentucky, and there are 0 coal miners in my family, but Loretta's story is still kin to mine. It took me a little while to figure out where I was from. There is, however, one question that's been asked of me at several times during my life. How did you get here? This question is simple, yet impossible. How did I get here? How does it come to be that I start there in Oconee County, South Carolina, and somehow end up here, mostly intact? The nibbling around of this question is why I started writing in a journal when I was 10 years old. My first entry was on election night, 1980. It read, "I am so angry. I hate Ronald Reagan. How could these people choose him?" Ever since, I am trying to make sense of it all, trying to explain how a person like me ends up wherever it is I land. I knew how to get from wherever I was to the upstate of South Carolina, which is where both sides of my family are from. I knew that places shape you, carve things out, create distinctions, and half the time you don't even notice until you're somewhere unfamiliar. The first time someone asked me the question was in 1993. I had moved to Madison, New Jersey from Knoxville to start my graduate work in theology. Let me give you a little bit of context. When I arrived there, it was the very first time I had seen the campus. I was so poor as a social worker working in Knoxville that it wasn't even an option for me to go visit the school I would spend the next 3 years. They gave me the most money, this school, and that's where I went. My parents made the journey with me. All my earthly possessions were loaded up into a wooden trailer covered in a brown tarp. As soon as we pulled in through the ivy-draped gates, I knew I was very out of my element. Ellie Mae Clampett had arrived. We might as well have been blaring the theme song to The Deliverance. I got to that school through a scholarship, a really, really good scholarship. Each year, 2 students from Appalachia were selected for a minority scholarship. This was very shocking to me, but I was ready to take that money. I was woefully unprepared academically, and well, every single time I opened my mouth to speak, somebody had a question for me. Did you grow up wearing shoes? Do you have any cousins who married? Do you have racists in your family? Do you love country music? Can you say the word ocean? Always the outsider. In my first week of classes, during the icebreaker part, I talked out loud and said a little bit about where I was from. The professor seemed genuinely curious, and then she said, "How exactly did you get here?" The question mortified me. What was I supposed to say? "I'm the hillbilly charity case. Won't you please let me join your club?" The outsider moved further out. A bit later in her class, though, I got a bit of a leg up. I came in one day and she had written on the board, "Who are your people?" And then she left the room. I wrote and wrote and wrote about Issaquah Falls, about Stump House Mountain, about all the people who raised me. The next class period, she came back and told us that this was an exercise in identifying communities of accountability. Communities that define who we become. Communities you are forever running away from and running home to. She told us that most white people typically struggle with this question because white supremacy means we view our experiences as universal, preferable. Pointing at me, she says, but some subcultures exist within their own well-defined cultural parameters. Like Kristen, she's from Appalachia and can speak from there. Dear readers, I did not want to speak for Appalachia, nor was I fully aware of my own white supremacy or what being Appalachian even meant. I wore Doc Martens and listened to 9 Inch Nails. I was politically liberal and annoyingly active, and I loathed most country music. See, I was an outsider at home, too. But the whole humiliating series of questions gave me reason to keep trying to answer them. I knew we were hillbillies. The stereotypes did not fade with time. So we wore them as a badge of honor. We'll let you have your little laughs and your little judgments. In the meantime, we're going to do what we want to do. I knew that mountain people were not synonymous with Southern people, even though we share a chunk of things in common. I did not know we were considered a culture. Despite the roaming life of a Southern Baptist preacher's daughter, I stayed close to Appalachia most of my life. The stereotypes were always there, but we had our ways of dealing with them. I grew up spending many 4th of Julys at a festival past Walhalla on the way to the mountains in North Georgia. When you got into the festival, they handed you a little piece of black wax, and you would put it over your front tooth, cover up your tooth. There were greasy poles you could climb, and greasy pigs you could chase. Ironically, it's the one way that you can deal with shame. See, you can run into it, claim it, and then reframe it. That's what this festival was all about. We knew we were the joke, but we were in on it, and we were having a really good time. I took to being a cultural ambassador of sorts. I would tell people that my family had 2 things in their blood: alcohol and the Lord Jesus Christ. Intoxicated by both with equal fervor. The fall, the redemption, death, resurrection. Myself, I took generous helpings from both sides of the family tree. But my family, Lord, my family, they kept me tethered to those mountains, those ballads, those shine-soaked morality tales. Daddy's people came out of Walhalla, and Mama's out of Seneca. They were rivals, in fact. I grew up with uncles and aunts and cousins. I had all 4 of my grandparents growing up, 2 great-grandparents until I was in my late 20s. We had a couple of family reunions every single year with 2nd and 3rd cousins, chicken and dumplings, and lots of stories. My mama's father, Papa, was a mountain of a man. He grew up in a mill town with a gambling, alcoholic father, lived in a mill house, and shopped at the company store. When he was a teenager, he caught a sermon from a traveling evangelist and felt called to the ministry. But before he could get started, he joined the army to fight the Nazis. Before he was shipped, though, he started working at the factory. And it was there that he saw the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, my grandmother. He went up to her and he said, "One day, I'm going to marry you." And she laughed in his face and said, "Well, we'll see how you do." They wed after a year of writing letters while he was overseas. She says he wore her down. They were married over 60 years when he passed. He was a preacher and a pastor my whole life. Now, maybe you don't know this, but it can be kind of rare to find someone who can both deliver the fire from the pulpit and hold hands with the dying. But my papa was a master at both. mainly because he was an impeccable storyteller. Stories about heaven and hell, about a hard heart that gets softened by forgiveness, a hope that never wavers. That's the good part. The other part, though, is that he was deeply invested in Republican politics. Democrats were the devil, and Republicans in name only, the rhinos, like his Senator Lindsey Graham, were just as bad. My grandfather carried on a contentious correspondence with Senator Graham for almost 20 years. Politics was a common topic of conversation at the Ellenberg family reunions for the men. I remember one time, when I was about 19, we had all gathered and the men were sitting in a circle talking about politics and religion. The women were in a totally separate place getting potato salad together and watching out for the kids. I elbowed my way into the men's circle and quickly became engaged, very vocal. And when I get really angry, I cry. So there were tears, and I was arguing about inerrancy and social justice gospels, and my papa ordered me out of the circle. He told me to go help with the kids. I stomped off, incandescent with rage. Later he told me, Kristen, a little knowledge can make a person think they know more than they do. He told me he loved me, even though I had a tendency to put myself in places where I did not belong. I couldn't argue with that. Odd granddaughter. Sad by the standard of a cloud, been round so long, I don't know who how my people are. Skin cracked from bales of fibrous cotton, laughter like spit from the mouth of God, eyes keen from too much Milltown, odd granddaughter begs for back scratches and Carolina figs. Odd granddaughter prepares the old ones for documentary film. Odd granddaughter done run off, always running off. Wait, girl, come here. You still blood. How you expect the thing to grow if you keep yanking it up? It's my papa's voice that unveils. It's the red clay and the boiled peanuts and the hoop cheese that line the road home. Both my grandmothers picked cotton to survive in their lifetimes. With 8 children between them, nothing came easy. On my daddy's side of the family, the redemption stories were a little different. When I was a child, we would visit my great-grandmother, my daddy's kin, up in what is called Bear Swamp. It is a holler with no electricity and well water. Their house had a large cast iron wood stove sitting in the center of the house to keep them through the winter. There was a porch that had missing boards, but lots of instruments. There were jugs everywhere, and a permanent smell of cured meat. My daddy was deeply embarrassed to take us up there, but my brother and I loved it. I remember saying to my brother, I don't know what his problem is. These people don't even have to work for a living, and they seem pretty happy to me. Cruising up through Walhalla. Daddy warned me, so did Granny. You better ride them brakes. Lord knows how many people's been killed going around that bend. All the way up Highway 28 straight through Walhalla, and then the roads get like corkscrews, and the sweat of teenagers leaves the mountain road slick. And I remember tow-headed boys coldly flying around Oconey's Dead Man's Curve, Southstone Shine, and desperate to be remembered. The kudzu is not near as offensive as the Confederate flags, but there's bluegrass at the general store on Friday night, railroads that burrow into mountains and abruptly end, waterfalls in every direction. The locals whisper do's and don'ts, but the cops, they'll tell everybody. As the altitude gets higher, you better slow way down. And remember, them poor boys done flew off the edge, like they was on a race to the bottom. On that side of the family, I'm closest to my granny, my daddy's mother. She is one of a kind, deeply obsessive, sensitive, funny, loyal, a miracle of energy. She married a man named Claude, who made his living as an auto mechanic out of the backyard of the house. My grandfather was a Navy man who was known for his bluntness. There was only one group of people that he would not deal with: preachers. He'd say, "Them holy rollers can't be trusted. I don't fix their cars because you'll never see a penny from them." Imagine his disappointment when his oldest son left home to marry a preacher's daughter and pursue the ministry. My granny's political too, but not like my papa. It's really her fault that I'm a Democrat. I told her over the summer that this was true, and this tickled her to death. Her favorite president was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, Kristen, I tell you, there ain't nothing can beat that man. He cared about the poor people. He was the first one, Kristen, that made sure the poor people got something. Because that Hoover, he would let us starve, is what he would. Now, we ate nothing but cornmeal gravy and water, all during the Depression till Roosevelt. Because you know what he did? He brought in the WPA. And every once in a while, Kristen, we get a ham. And I tell you what, we'd be sitting around that table, and we thought we was rich eating that ham. I love him. I don't care who you put up in that White House. I don't care what they do. I don't care how they do it. Ain't nobody gonna beat that man. When I went with my Sunday school class down to Georgia, we went to his little house down there, and I tell you what, Kristen, I saw this dish that he ate oatmeal out of the morning he died. I seen it. And when he died, we came down the mountain to Seneca to watch that train take his body by. And I tell you, it was the saddest thing. I asked her about Eleanor, and she said, "Well, she's all right. I'll tell you one thing. She's about the ugliest woman I ever seen." She isn't one to shy away from her opinions. And Lord help you if you ask about Trump, which I did. That old poop block, he's a devil, sitting up there thinking he's some kind of king. I tell you what, round here they love him. I had to sit in that Sunday school and hear these women go on and on and on about how much they love that man. He makes me sick. This place, South Carolina, you know it, Kristen, this place is filthy with Republicans. And they fight each other to say how much they love him. I just don't know how we're going to get him out of there, Kristen. I worry over it. After her husband, my grandfather, died, she kind of broke out of her shell a little bit. She stopped listening to bluegrass music and country music. She never did really like it. She just kind of pretended to. And so she discovered rock and roll when she was probably in her 60s. And she became obsessed with the band Bon Jovi. Now, my granny will defend me to anyone. As I said, she just refuses to be anything less than she is. She's 92 years old, and she just stopped cleaning people's houses for extra money about 4 years ago. Still does her own yard. She taught me that there is only pride in working hard for your family, no matter the work. Tell the truth and be done with it, she says. And the truth was that living in New Jersey and finishing that master's degree about killed me. Lonely does not begin to describe it. There was nary a Waffle House in sight. The only solace was with other outsiders, with memory, with music. I went so far when I was in graduate school as to demand that I be able to write certain papers in the dialect of my granny. My reasoning was that if my grandmother can't understand what I'm trying to say, it must just be elitist BS. They let me do it. because I was from a subculture. One afternoon, when I had determined to quit and go home, I went to see my advisor, and she told me a story. She said, listen, Kristen, I come from West Texas, and I had a similar terrible experience when I went into higher education in the Northeast. She said that the way that she coped was that she bought her very first pair of cowboy boots while she was living in New York City. She said that she started listening to Hank Williams and really coming into her accent. She said it felt really, really good to rebel, to reclaim herself in her own culture, even though it was incredibly clumsy and ridiculous. She advised me to stay, to fight, to insist on telling the stories I wanted to tell, that needed telling, that I was the bridge between where I came from and where I was going. When I came back to Appalachia after graduate school, I was determined to make some space for other outsiders like me. Now, some people fancy themselves somewhere decidedly more glamorous in their imaginings, but I figured I'd rather be a weirdo with a porch and good biscuits than a weirdo somewhere else. I didn't leave again for the next decade. In that time, I graduated with a master's degree in theology. I worked for 9 years in prisons. I started an intentional feminist community in Knoxville, Tennessee. I dated a wide assortment of broken and dangerous men. I rediscovered bluegrass and found Lucinda Williams. I self-published a book of poetry. I continued being incredibly annoyingly liberal and active. I never stepped foot inside a church again. I hiked hundreds of miles in the Smoky Mountains, produced and hosted a weekly women's open mic night for 5 years, performed poetry, did musical theater, was principal of a hippie high school for a year, fell for one of those dangerous men, which led to 2 years of living in hiding with several constantly violated orders of protection. Lots and lots of therapy. I lost my abusive father in 6 weeks to pancreatic cancer. I burned out spectacularly more than once. I lost 2 of my best friends to suicide, and I damn near killed myself. I was just going as fast as I could, trying to be somebody, to do something I could be proud of. I needed to do right by what was given to me. You'd think I would have learned that you couldn't run from my daddy. He had deep denial about where we came from. And I learned from him that when you get so deep in that denial, you can just get lost. See, my dad got indoor plumbing up in Bear Swamp when he was 13. I am 1 generation away from an outhouse and a tub in the front yard, y'all. So ashamed was my father that he was the first person to graduate college. But before he went to college, he took months of classes to get rid of his accent. He went on to earn a PhD. Now, none of this endeared him to my relatives, who scornfully derided him for acting above his raison. Me, I did not run from that red dirt. I wallowed in it. I used the rain to fashion it into anything that might help me. All the stories and relationships and holy places, they kept me tethered. They kept me from floating off, no matter how close I got to the edge. I learned to survive by hook or crook. The wisdom of my people is this: you're going to have to find your own way. And if you can't find a way, you better make a way. And if you can't make a way, you better make do. No matter what, stay close to the people and places that show you who you are, why you're here, how to get through. You may be a hillbilly, but that doesn't mean nothing. You still got something to say, even if people think you're a dumb hick every time you open your mouth. Being an outsider means you can see further. I got here because for generations before me, like kudzu, we refused to die. Well, we lay on our backs and look at the stars, 'cause up here, folks, heaven ain't that far. High on the mountaintop, we live and we learn and we laugh a lot. Folks up here know what they've got, high on the mountaintop. High on the mountaintop, the rest of the world's like a little bitty spot. I ain't coming down, no never I'm not, high on the mountaintop, high on the mountaintop. Thank you.